Just signing in right now. Okay, we're live.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, both to those who are visible on the screen and those who are listening. I call this meeting of the Subdivision Development Appeal Board to order. My name is Sean Krauser. I'll be the chair of this meeting. All questions and comments will be directed through me. I'd like to introduce the board members that are hearing this appeal. We have Vi Sanford, Jill Jameson, Adam Dreidzik, Greg Birch, Harry Scott, and Rochelle Harding. The clerk for this hearing is Jolene Noel. Now, I appreciate everybody's patience as we undertake this special COVID edition of SDAB hearings. This is the first one that we are doing electronically through Zoom. So there may be some hiccups from time to time, but what I will be doing is I'll make sure everybody has a chance to speak that wants to speak. And I will be going over the whole order of proceedings in just a moment. Before doing that, I would like to adopt the agenda. So Jolene, are there any other additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda as provided?
There are not.
Great. So I'd like to make a motion for the board members to vote with a raising your hand when I call the question. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. All those in favor? I see all the hands, so it's carried unanimously. The matter before us today is DP 2020-012 regarding a detached accessory dwelling unit and variances to same. Before I get into introducing the appellant and the applicant and asking them some questions, I would like to introduce the members of town administration who are also present on this call. We have Camilla Ramos-Strankman. She is the development officer in this particular case. We have Lauren Miller, the manager of planning. We have Marcus Henry, supervisor of planning. I believe I have everybody else here. We also have, I should say, Jane Dean is also helping us technologically behind the scenes. She's not on camera at the moment. I would now like to ask the appellant to identify yourself. And that's you, Ms. Kupfer.
Natalie Kupfer.
Okay. And do you have any objections to the any of the board members hearing the appeal?
No.
Okay. And have you received a copy of the agenda package that was distributed to the board?
I have.
Okay. And do you have any objections to the information that was contained in there?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to put you on mute again for a moment. And now, Mr. Bourget, if you can just introduce yourself for the record.
My name is Guy Bourget, and I live at 922 15th Street.
Great, thank you. And you are the original applicant in this matter for the development permit in question. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Great. And do you have any objection to the any of the board members hearing this appeal?
No, not at all.
Great, thank you. And have you received a copy of the agenda package distributed to the board?
I have, yes.
Great. And do you have any objections with regards to the information provided?
No.
No. Other than, of course, you know,
Yes.
the differing opinions of which
Absolutely.
you will draw attention our attention to further. Before I go over the hearing outline, at this point, and I'm going to just unmute both of the appellant and applicant here. It's at this point that if there are any preliminary matters, such as postponement requests or anything of that nature, this is the time that we would do that or handle that. Do either of you have any preliminary matter that we need to deal with?
No.
No?
No, I don't. Nope.
Okay, so we will proceed then. And we will just when people aren't speaking, we just put you back on mute. So, all right. So the hearing outline for everybody gathered is as follows, and please listen for, especially for anything that would apply to when you're going to speak, so you'll know in the order where that comes. The hearing process this evening will be as follows. First, administration will make a presentation. Then the appellant will speak in favor of the appeal. That will be followed by others speaking in favor of the appeal and any correspondence in favor of the appeal. Then the applicant and those speaking in opposition to the appeal and any correspondence in opposition to the appeal will be heard by the board. Lastly, those speaking neither in favor nor in opposition to the appeal and any related correspondence will be heard by the board. At any time, the board may ask for clarification by any of the persons speaking to the appeal. The board may ask for a short recess from time to time if needed. When we're preparing to close the hearing, the administration will be asked if they wish to provide any clarification or closing remarks. That will be followed by any clarification or closing remarks from the appellant, and then followed by any clarification or closing remarks from the applicant. The board would then close the public portion of the hearing and go in camera, which is a private meeting, to review all of the information provided. And the board then provides a written decision within 15 days following the hearing. Now, this is important that the purpose of this hearing is for the appellant and all affected parties to provide the board with information to the appeal. Now, the board must base its decision on planning merits, and we are guided by the MGA as well as regarding having regard for the land use bylaw and other relevant statutory materials. Please ensure that all comments are directed to me for the board. And we had also asked that all comments be of proper decorum and be succinct. If any person has already made a point, simply state that you agree with the point and continue. Now, the way it's going to work when we get to calling on people who would like to speak, we do have some names of prior registrations and have a sense of whether they're speaking for, against, or neutral. When it comes to the portion of the hearing where they will provide their comments, we will call upon them one by one, and then we'll also call upon anybody else that is in the meeting that hasn't spoken to see if they would like to make a comment. Now, if any person is presenting a document, then we will move to the share screen portion while we are referring to the document, and then stop the share screen when the document is no longer being referred to. Now, I would ask the appellant and the applicant, do you have any questions or concerns regarding the process that I've just outlined?
Just that Hans-Peter still can't get on, Jolene, but other the process, no problem.
So what we have indicated, especially, I believe he's in Switzerland, correct?
Yeah, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, and because of the technological differences, I do understand that he's provided a written comment, and so that will be something that is regarded by the board as well. So if he's not able to speak in person, we do have his written comments. Okay. Yeah. And Mr. Bourget, I understand that you said no, you don't have any problems with the outline of the process that I provided.
That's correct. I don't have any concerns.
Great. All right. All right. With all the preliminary matters out of the way, then I would now ask the development officer to make their presentation with respect to this appeal.
Okay. And so, Jolene, can you see my presentation?
Yes, and we can
Yes.
also, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go into this. Hello, everyone. My name is Camila Ramos-Strinkman. I'm going to be presenting DP 2020-012 to everyone. I'll ask that you hold all questions until the end of my presentation, just to help keep things moving smoothly. but should there be connection issues, I'm sure Jolene or our chair can let me know and I can repeat something if we have audio issues. So without further ado, I'll get started. The application was deemed complete on February 11th, and we issued a decision of approval on March 9th. An appeal was received on March 30th, one day before the required deadline. And now normally this appeal hearing would not commence.
Ms. Ramos-Strankman, on the screen, it's showing it as the next slide. It hasn't come forward to the center of the screen, and I'm not able to read it because of the pictures that I have. So are you able to move it to the next slide? Or
Camila, it's showing in presenter mode.
Let's see. Try one more time. And how about that?
Sure. Now, yeah, now if you, yeah. And so you're now talking to the second slide. Perfect. Great. Thank you very much. Sorry for the interruption.
Nope, thank you. Should anything else happen, just let me know.
Great, thank you.
As I was saying, having a hearing today would not normally meet the Municipal Government Act timelines. However, due to COVID, Municipal Affairs granted a type of extension to give municipalities a type of buffer time to adapt from working from home and changing our processes. And so we instead had to ensure that our appeal hearing occurred within 30 days of April 17th, instead of the 30 days from the receipt of the appeal. And so given all this information, the application and appeal can be considered to have met statutory requirements.
Great, thank you. Duly noted.
Looking at the site context, we're looking at 922 15th Street. This is located in an R1 district, and the property is surrounded by residential homes, most with other detached accessory buildings providing access from the lane. And on site currently, there's a garage with access from the lane and one single family home on the site. Looking at the site a little bit more closely, the scope of the project in particular is focused to the north of the site, where there is already an existing garage, like I said. Now, should the application be approved, the existing garage would be demolished and the new structure rebuilt in its place. And from the site plan, you can also see the proposed parking stall in the northeast corner.
Great, thank you.
So looking a bit more closely at the proposal, here are the north and east elevations, the north one being on top, and this would be the site or the side that is facing the lane. This side facing the east, and you can see how the stairs go up into the building and the entrance would be from the rear. A car also fits comfortably on site that you can see from this elevation. And here are the south and west elevations. Again, the top image is facing south, which is facing into the property, and the west elevation facing to the west. So, as described in my staff report, this application was submitted and approved under Land Use Bylaw 22-2010. However, the appeal affects the timeline of the application and actually brings the application under the jurisdiction of Land Use Bylaw 2018-22. So I'm going to go into variances under both bylaws in a little bit more detail, but just know that I'll probably be just referring to the Land Use Bylaw 22-2010 as the old bylaw and the other bylaw as the new or current bylaw, just to make things a little bit simpler. And so here's the overview of what I'm going to get into. Under the old bylaw, there are variances to height and site coverage that were approved. And under the new bylaw, there are variances to height, bicycle parking, gross floor area, and also dormer length. But it's not the same variance to height as in the old bylaw. And I'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute. So looking at the old land use bylaw, the old land use bylaw had a restriction for site coverage that was in line with our restrictions for any accessory buildings, regardless if they had a suite or not. And so here the lot coverage was restricted to 10%, and the application proposed a small variance to site coverage going beyond that limit by 1%. Now, this variance didn't carry over into the new land use bylaw, as the new regulations around detached accessory dwelling units actually increase the allowable site coverage allowed for them. And the second variance under the old land use bylaw was related to building height. Specifically, the proposed building was looking to exceed the height of the principal building on site. The proposed building was proposing to be 6.5 meters tall, which would exceed the height of the principal building on site by a little over 1 meter. So now,
Camila, you're stalling out a little bit.
and the last thing I want to mention is that under the old land use bylaw, a detached accessory dwelling unit was listed as a, oh, sorry, repeat that. I just want accessory dwelling unit is listed as a discretionary use,
Yeah,
and
Camila,
therefore required for approval.
Yeah.
However,
Camila,
still here.
yeah, you were checking in and out as far as the audio that we were hearing. So I was wondering if you could just pick it. I think that it started to get better. So I wonder if you could just pick it up by introducing the variances under the new bylaw.
Yes, sorry, I missed the first part of that, but I think I caught on again.
Okay.
So, going to try and share my screen again and see if this works. Can you see my presentation again?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And so I believe where we left off was, I just want to make the distinction that this use is listed as a discretionary use under the old bylaw. However, it's listed as a permitted use under the current bylaw. Yeah. Did anything else get missed while I was lost connection? Sorry, Sean, I think you've muted yourself.
Sorry. It was tough to say if there was anything else missed because we couldn't hear it, but you'll now go under each of the variances under the new bylaw? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so looking into the variances under the new bylaw, the new land use bylaw proposed new parking regulations for all uses, and those included new bike stalls. This was previously unrequired for residential uses, but under the new land use bylaw, we will require 2 long-term bike stalls. And now long-term bike stalls are defined by being secure and covered, and there's a multitude of ways that that could be achieved. Realistically, it could be feasible to easily install bike stalls into the design somehow. However, as the approved plans didn't show any bike stalls, this is still technically a variance under the new land use bylaw. Another variance was related to the gross floor area. So under the new land use bylaw, gross floor area on the 2nd story of an accessory dwelling unit, it's now limited to 40 square meters. And this is reduced from 50 square meters under the old land use bylaw. And so now there's a variance of 9.5 square meters. Okay. One other variance was relating to dormer length. Again, we did not have dormer size regulations specific to suites under the old land use bylaw. And so the proposed building is requesting a very minor variance to dormer length, as dormers, as the proposed dormers are proposed to exceed the 70% limit by 2.4%. It's also important to note that these dormers are facing south and therefore inwards into the site, and therefore potentially having less of an impact on adjacent neighbors than if they were maybe on a different wall. Finally, new regulations on building height were also brought into the land use bylaw for suites. And so while there's still a variance to building height, it's not the same variance as the old land use bylaw. So the old land use bylaw had a variance to height as it was exceeding the height of the principal building on site. However, that regulation no longer exists under the current land use bylaw. And so the specific height variance we're looking at here is that height is now restricted depending on the roof pitch of a suite. And so as per the graph, you can see the proposed building is 6.5 meters tall, but with 812 roof pitch, they're limited to 6 meters. And so therefore they're requesting a 0.5 meter variance. So in summary, this application was reviewed and approved under Land Use Bylaw 22-2010. And this appeal brings the application under the jurisdiction of a new land use bylaw 2018-22, and therefore new regulations are creating new variances. The new variances are all still within the approval authority of a development officer. However, due to the timelines that we were faced, the applicant had no opportunity to revise the application in order to meet the regulations of the new land use bylaw. And finally, I just want to note that 10 letters in opposition of the development have been received. My staff report initially indicated 9 letters. However, 1 additional submission was made after the writing of the report. And so, in conclusion, the board may approve the development permit or refuse the application, stating reasons why. And I've also prepared a draft Schedule A for the board to consider, and you can choose to make edits to or revisions to this schedule. And this finally concludes my presentation, and I will be able to answer any questions that you might have at this time.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. If you could please stop this screen sharing, and then I'll be able to see all my board members in one screen. Perfect. Thank you. Really appreciate the presentation. Just as my board members are pulling together any questions that they have, I just had a couple of questions for clarity. So if this application were brought now without any variances, so if it completely complied with the new bylaw, it would have to be approved because it's a permitted use now, correct?
So it would have to be approved under a building permit, but yes, if there were no variances being proposed, being a permitted use, it would only need a building permit for approval.
Right. So what the essence of this appeal is, what we're currently assessing is, in light of all the information that we've been provided and will be provided, we're assessing whether or not we're willing to grant the variances with respect to the new bylaw.
Yes, I think maybe Marcus can elaborate on this a little bit more, but our legal review has stated that SDAB cannot issue a decision on a bylaw that's no longer in effect anymore. That one has been rescinded and we have a new bylaw in its place.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Henry, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I will just add that you do also have the opportunity, to make conditions, if you were going to approve the development, to require the requirements of LUB 2018, to be put in place. So that's also an option available to you. And you don't just have to flat out, grant the variances. There is the option to put conditions on the permit as well, if you choose to do so.
Great, thank you. I'm going to now ask my board members by just a show of their hand who has questions, and then I will go one by one. I'll call upon you. So if you could just raise your hand if you have any questions for administration. Okay, first hand I saw was Adam. So if you could please ask your question.
Camilla, what are the parking requirements for permitting a suite of this nature in the new land use bylaw, and how does that compare to the parking conditions in your proposed conditions of approval?
So when you say parking, I think what you mean is relating to vehicle parking. And so they're providing that 1 additional vehicle parking stall for this suite, as well as 2 parking stalls located inside the accessory building. So all 3 parking stalls are being provided as required by the new land use bylaw.
sorry, to follow up, the 3 parking stalls are specifically for vehicle use associated with the suite development?
No, to clarify, 2 parking stalls are required for the primary and principal dwelling unit, that single family home, and 1 additional parking stall is required for the new unit. And so they are providing 3 in total.
Thank you.
Any more questions, Adam? No? Okay. The next hand I saw was Vi Sanford.
Thank you. Camilla, I'd just like to ask you if the addition of the covered bicycle stalls would change the site coverage, and if that is affected in any way with the 2018 land use bylaw.
So it would depend on how bike stalls were proposed. It could be possible to put the bike stalls inside the suite, or maybe covered underneath the stairs, or otherwise inside the building, and therefore no additional site coverage would be needed. However, there could be all sorts of other options. There are all sorts of secure bike stalls locked up, similar to what you see outside Elevation Place. And those wouldn't necessarily be considered a building and therefore not have an impact on site coverage. The only thing that would be if they made an addition to the building, or if they proposed a new building like a shed to store those bike stalls.
And so what is the maximum site coverage at this point in time
For an accessory dwelling unit, it's a 15% site coverage. And the distinction there is that the new land use bylaw is trying to propose more of more accessory dwelling units on 2 floors, but more spread out. And so it was actually increased. So potentially they could do that with no additional variances.
Okay.
So whereas the original application would have needed a variance for the site coverage, this one under the new bylaw does not.
Yes.
Correct. Thank you.
Only because the maximum is 15% now, right?
Right, instead of 10.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Greg Birch.
Hi, thank you. This has to do with a question. It stems from comment in the material we were given on page 7. Just to quote it, important to note is that the applicant has no ability to make changes to the application in order to conform to the requirements of the new land use bylaw. And I'm just wondering, when was this application actually received? And I guess the context is, the council passed the new land use bylaw at the end of December. So there's 3 months of awareness as to what was coming. So I'm confused about this statement about inability to make a change.
Yeah, so that statement really referred to the fact that after the decision was issued, the application halted essentially. So they couldn't make a change to the application after administration has issued a decision on it. However, the appeal brings it into a new land use bylaw, and therefore the applicant didn't have an opportunity to make changes to account for those. However, going to your question about when the application was first received, I'm looking at my notes here, and the application was received on February 1st. So the land use bylaw was ready and available to be explored, but it would have been impossible to try and meet both requirements of both bylaws to design for both of them. Yeah.
Thank you. Just the last question I have. I understand in preparation of the new land use bylaw, there was a lot of dialogue between the development industry, BODA, for instance, and the town. And I'm just wondering about the fairly significant variances being introduced here and what the thinking would be in terms of the comments the town had with the development industry. In other words, there's some significant relaxations here. The upper floor area, for instance, by 23%. I'm just, that's quite at odds with what was negotiated with the development industry, as I understand it. And just would like some general comment up on that.
So that would be, to unbox all of that, you'd have to look at a lot of public engagement the town had with BODA, as well as the residents in the town of Canmore. And it was really a challenge to balance the desire for larger structures that maybe some developers want to see versus smaller structures that maybe more residents wanted to see in their neighborhood. And that's helps to indicate the differences in those regulations that you can see the height variant or the height difference under both bylaws, as well as the gross floor area, specifically limiting that on that second floor. And it was a challenge to try and balance that. And there were significant changes, but I wouldn't say it was just from the development community, if that helps answer your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, that's my questions.
Can I please add to that, Greg, as well, just to respond? Colleague, with regard to the engagement with BODA and the variances that you're seeing before you now, the only reason why we're even having to consider this is because of the timing of the application. The application came in on February 1st, so the applicant has the rights, to apply the application under the old land use bylaw. The issue that we have before us, today is that it was approved under the old land use bylaw, but due to the scheduling of the appeal board, that now flips us into the new land use bylaw, which means we have to apply the regulations on the application for the new land use bylaw, which means that the applicant didn't have the opportunity to make those amendments just on the basis of the scheduling of the hearing.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
Great, thank you. Before moving on, I'd ask if there are any other questions from any of the other board members. Yes, Rochelle.
Just to follow up on that, clearly the applicant didn't have an opportunity to make any changes, but did you, in light of the timing of this hearing, go back and review the application again pursuant to the new bylaw and confirm that you would have made the same decision?
It is hard to say exactly the decision we would make. Reviewing the new variances, I think administration would have at least tried to reduce the extent of some of those variances, particularly bike stalls could be easily added to remove that variance. The dormers, potentially a very minor change as well to meet those. It would be a totally different application. We would have to see if the half-meter height variance or the site coverage would have made a different impact. And we haven't necessarily reviewed the application with that in mind. A decision was made under the old bylaw after all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Scott or Ms. Jameson, do you have any questions? Mr. Scott, you had a question? No? Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much for that presentation and those questions. I would now ask the appellant, we're going to ask Ms. Kupfer to make your presentation with respect to the appeal. And we'll just unmute you here. There we go.
I also have a PowerPoint presentation, so just bear with me and see if I can get this working. Somebody might have to help me work my way through this.
So perhaps if you can minimize the screen so that you can then, yeah, there you go. You're sharing your screen now, and then you can just open it.
Is that working?
Yes, very good. Well done. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. I have met you already, but my name is Natalie Kupfer, and I'm here representing not only myself and my family, but 10 other concerned neighbors and their families too. Some have been, as you can see, unable to attend because they're locked down in Switzerland. But anyway, I live at 921 16th Street, which is directly behind and on the north side of 922 15th Street. My agenda today is the purpose of my presentation is to provide the board with a real life context, demonstrating that this DP is more than just a set of drawings and a plot plan, but a structure with volume and mass and context that will have real social and urban impact. First, I'd like to look at our alley today, then some zoning issues, how the neighborhood will be impacted by this development, and why this development contradicts the land use bylaws from my perspective, and our ask. So, there are numerous physical, structural, and social reasons why any additional living space will impact the entire 900 block, not just the immediate neighbors. Topography. This is the 900 block of 16th Street. The Fairhome on west and 8th Avenue going to the high school on the east. Both the alley in question and 16th Street are gravel with no sidewalks. As you can see, 16th dead ends in Policeman's Creek. Therefore, 50% of all of the lots on this alley are alley access only. And this is quite significant. Orientation. Downtown is built on an east-west grid with either your front yard or your backyard facing the mountains and the sun to the south. Some of us deliberately purchased or built with south-facing backyards so that we could enjoy the views and the sun with the expectation of maximum privacy in our own backyards. Front yards are quasi-public. Backyards are not. For these 5 lots, with Policeman's Creek behind them, their backyard is also their front yard and their streetscape. It's worth noticing that all the houses on 15th Street have garages in the back, and that's because these do not affect either their sunlight or their view. A quick inventory of the current property. We have 20 lots, 18 homes, 14 garages, 2 empty lots, 2 long-term rentals, 5 alley access only dwellings, and 2 alley access only suites, with 16 full-time residents. That means that 7 or 35% of the existing living spaces are alley access only. This is already 10% higher than the town's anticipated build out for ADUs, which is 5%. So one more alley access only suite will bring us to 40%. For these 7 dwellings, the alley is their only access. Walking, biking, driving, having visitors over, the trades, plumbers, electricians, the services, EPCOR, TELUS, Shaw, delivery, moving trucks, all have to come down the alley. And more importantly, emergency services must have access at all times. In terms of traffic, parking, and dwellings, we feel strongly that our alley has reached capacity. It is maxed out and already a serious access and safety issue. Further development is unsustainable. In the past couple of years, we've seen a welcome revitalization of our block, with young families moving in and renovating older homes. We now have 9 children living on the block and numerous grandchildren. For some, the alley is their only access, and their safety is everyone's concern. Obviously, some of these existing issues are policing problems. And though they have been brought to the attention of the town, bylaw, and the RCMP, nothing happens because we're not a street, we're an alley. It would be helpful to have both a posted speed limit and a no parking sign. In summer, the alley is dusty because it's gravel. In winter, it's not plowed. And there are times when the homeowners have to shovel the length of the alley because this is their only exit. Adding more suites will simply add more problems. This suite is on the east end of our block. Although it has the required 8-foot wide parking space, because of the solid fence and the solid stairway, the parking space is too narrow to park in and open both doors of even the smallest car. The turning radius is too tight, so it's impossible to approach from the west end and is seldom, if ever, used and never used in the winter, as you can see. Because this garage is also a workshop, the homeowner also parks in the back, and neither vehicle here is parked properly. Although this lane parking is bigger and regularly used at the suite on the west end of our block, the second tenant, as you can see, is parked in the alley. Both suites are adjacent to main roads with no houses and ample parking. However, only one tenant has ever parked on the side street and walked in. Overnight guests and visitors also park on the lane, presenting a serious concern re visibility for small children and emergency access. There is no way any emergency vehicle is getting down our alley when this happens. Therefore, it's reasonable to expect that another suite will create more of the same parking problems, which, as you can see, is going to be especially problematic for our block. Walk around town. You'll see that parking behind suites is a very common problem. Most suites have 2 tenants, 2 cars, 1 parking space. Now I'd like to look a little bit about zoning. We are an R1 neighborhood. R1 is supposed to be the least dense zoning, with the tightest restrictions for coverage, heights, setbacks, secondary uses such as vacation rentals, Airbnbs, day homes, with the least building density and the highest expectation for privacy and personal space. However, it's interesting to look at the reality of R1 in Canmore today. From my front door to your front door, across the average street is typically between 32 to 38 meters or 124 feet. This includes 2 9-meter setbacks plus a 20-meter street with sidewalk allowance. Maximum privacy, low building mass. This photo of an alley between 3rd and 4th Street, which is zoned R4 and therefore expected to be 4 times the density, from my front door to your front door is typically 21 to 24 meters or 80 feet. This includes approximately 2 9-meter setbacks and a 6-meter lane. Reasonable privacy, reasonable building mass. From the front door of my suite to the front door of your suite in an R1 alley would be 10 meters, 32 feet. This is 92 feet closer than an R1 street and 50 feet closer than an R4, which means that R1 alleys would have higher density than R4 alleys. When 6.5 meters tall, you will see that these suites have huge building mass and would provide absolutely no privacy for anyone. This is a rendition. I took a picture of an existing suite and duplicated it onto the other side, and it is to scale. And this is what the town is sorry, let me back up a little bit. This is what 2 opposing 6-meter suites would look like. The town suggests that ADU development is suitable in less dense R1 neighborhoods, but with current setbacks of nearly 2 meters, if they continue to approve 6-meter tall suites, and in our case a 6.5-meter tall suite, short of a multiplex, R1 alleys will become more densely built up than any other neighborhood. The following slides show quotes from the land use bylaws and the town website that I feel are pertinent to this application. The LUB is a very conscientious, socially conscientious document whose purpose goes beyond simple measurements and protects the rights of all of its residents. Here, the LUB talks about size, form, and mass, and how we must protect both privacy and enjoyment of views. The LUB also talks about our greatest asset, our Rocky Mountains, and its protection. It's why we live here and why everyone else wants to live here. Today on the 900 block of 16th Street, most of us still enjoy views from the east end of Rundle, Hawling, all the way to the Three Sisters. That is everyone except those who live behind 906, a 6-meter tall suite. Remember that for the 7 alley access only dwellings, our alley is their street. So it's all the more important to maintain appropriate building mass and a pedestrian, child-friendly, safe environment. The socially responsible concepts that appear in the LUB are reinforced throughout the town's website. This is an R1 friendly suite that complies with the LUB. High windows protect the privacy of the occupants and neighbors. About the size and height of a regular 2-car garage, it does not block views or light. It is R1 appropriate in terms of building mass and does not devalue surrounding properties. As the homeowner has no garage, there's the added benefit that there's potentially little change in traffic volume by building this suite. Parking, however, is still an issue. Another example of an R1 friendly design. High windows on this suite create privacy for the tenant and maintain privacy for the surrounding homes. Skylights flood the interior with natural light. This single-story suite is also an example of both ADU mobility friendly and aging in place concepts. Another R1 friendly suite, still with the same problems. In Canmore, the majority of 6-meter tall suites are built on the north side of the lot, where they do not impact the views or sunlight of the homeowner, with decks and windows also on the north side, again with no impact to the homeowner. While those houses on the other side of the alley lose everything the LUB values: light, views, privacy, enjoyment, lifestyle, and property value. At the very least, any losses should be to the homeowner or beneficiary. Ninth Street is probably the best example of negative impact of building masses at street level, with side-by-side 6-meter suites dominating this R1 lane, blocking views, invading privacy, eroding enjoyment, devaluing the opposing properties, and as we have seen, contrary to every right protected by the LUB. These 6-meter suites are not mobility or aging friendly. It's also worth noticing the shadowing effect. This causes ice and snow buildup, which is especially problematic in alley access dwellings and for emergency services. This is an extreme example where the home on the north side has literally put up an aerial fence in a desperate attempt to recreate their lost privacy. They will never regain their privacy. They will never regain their views, nor the value associated with those views, considered to be our greatest asset by the LUB. This suite, located on the east end of our alley, looks directly into 903 and 905 16th Street. HP has put blinds on every window in his bungalow. You can see, well, you can't see actually because of the images of us, but right here at the slide there is the mountains. So you can see how he has lost his mountain view and therefore lost some property value as well. The west-facing deck looks the full length of our alley and directly into the Renners and the Matheson's yards. Ironically, Dale, another builder, realtor owner, is touting his views to the south as a selling feature, and this is the sale sign for this property. The same views that 903 and 905 used to enjoy. We do not want this to be our legacy too. So now let's look at the development proposal in question. At the time of application and approval, the DP was for a taller than 1 story, 6.5 meter suite, which was discretionary use in this district. The DP was approved with variances on site coverage and most importantly, a variance where the suite is 4 feet taller than the house, a bungalow. At the time, with 4 feet taller than the house, this was a significant precedence and should not have been approved according to the LUB. According to the new LUB, accessory dwellings should be secondary in size and appearance to the residential, the primary principal residence. Under LUB 1822, in effect at the time of the application, anything taller than a 1 story, AKA a suite or a loft, was discretionary in this district. The design hasn't changed. It's still 6.5 meters tall and 4 feet taller than the house. But changing the wording doesn't change the design, the height, or the impact, or the reality. While the words that define our social rights in the LUB have remained the same. This design is not unlike any other 6-meter tall suite in Canmore. I commend the applicant for raising the windows and railing to partially address privacy issues. However, this design will still block light, views, devalue our property, change our enjoyment, and alter our lifestyle. As we have seen from similar designs, it will have considerable building mass and shadow. And in this location will introduce more traffic and parking issues. It will be less pedestrian friendly and or safe for our children. And a further challenge to emergency services. In different ways, it will affect the life of the entire 900 block, and more so because of our already high volume of alley access only dwellings. This is a picture of the existing garage from my back gate. This is what's proposed. If this gets built, it will forever change my enjoyment of my property, my views, my privacy, and my property value, not to mention my neighbors too. All things that are supposed to be protected by the LUB, both old and new. I would like to acknowledge that this rendering can't address the slope of the roof, but call of what you may, a two-story, it's still 6.5 meters tall, and as illustrated by the 6-meter tall situation on 9th Street, will undoubtedly have significant building mass and impact at street level. Making the most of my southern exposure and views. This is my view. As you can see, I can look over towards Three Sisters. This will be my view. This is not why I or my neighbors chose to live in Canmore, or why we purchased in an R1, or with a south-facing backyard. In conclusion, the DP violates our rights and the intent of both the past and present LUBs. Existing structures prove this without a doubt. Given the topographical issues on our block, special consideration should have been given to the real-life context and impact of additional alley access development, the bigger picture, not to mention setting a precedence on height over the existing dwelling. And for these reasons alone, the DP should not have been approved. In conclusion, we are asking the board to consider the real-life context and impact that our block has reached capacity and cannot sustain another suite. Proposed DP as R1 unfriendly, a discretionary use at the time of application with variances and a 4-foot high precedence for height over the existing bungalow. Oppose a DP because it's shown to contradict both the LUB's protection of our social values and rights. Finally, we would like the appeal board to acknowledge 11 of the 15 homeowners who are opposed have submitted letters and, as we have shown, are affected by this DP. This concludes my presentation, and I would like to thank you for your time and consideration.
Great, thank you, Ms. Kupfer, for that very detailed presentation. I'm going to be opening it up to questions from our board, but there is one point that I wanted to get some clarity on from administration, and that is with respect to Ms. Kupfer's assertion, I believe, that it's a permitted use for a 1-story garden suite, but a discretionary use for 2-story. Is that, did I hear that correctly? And is that in fact the case, Ms. Ramos-Strenckwyn?
Yes, so I believe actually what the appellant was referencing was an older version of the proposed new land use bylaw, where that was initially proposed to council. However, it was changed during 3rd reading, and council made the decision to permit suites in all residential neighborhoods. So although administration presented that one, that wasn't actually the one that was ultimately approved.
Okay, so a 2-story garden suite is a permitted use, not discretionary.
Yes, it is a permitted use in this district.
Okay, great. Thank you. And now if I could look to my board members to see if they have, just by show of a hand, if you have any questions, and I'll call upon you in order that I see you. So any questions from board members? Mr. Dreitzik?
Yes, can you take me back to the bit of your presentation about criteria for evaluating a variance? I missed what those were and where that came from.
So Ms. Kupfer, if you could share your screen again and go to the portion of your presentation where it talks about conditions or the considerations for a variance.
So let me see. No, I'll need to escape from there.
Mr. Drysick, was that probably in the first third of the presentation where I was talking about the land use bylaw?
It was about halfway through.
Oh, okay.
Related to the land. Somewhere around where the cursor is going. Right now.
Not this one. I think maybe this.
It was about three or four bullet points at the bottom of the screen, framed as conditions or criteria that should be considered when deciding whether or not to grant a variance.
This one?
No. And I'm sorry to create the technological paper chase. Are you able to bring that to our attention?
What was that one? There was 3 points on that one there, under town website, number 21.
21, okay.
Actually, it would have been, what's 22?
Okay.
There's 3 points right there. Criteria to evaluate variances.
Help me understand where this comes from.
This is on the town's website under the roof slope section. So this is the where I got this in the town document. So it's LUB updates slope, roof slope. I think it's under buildings and ADU section. So changes to the LUB section of the town website.
And maybe I should direct this question to administration, but is this based on any formal policy or plan that the board should or must consider in this hearing?
Yes, so what our land use bylaw says, I have the new land use bylaw in front of me, and this is specifically in section 1.14 in our administration section, where it does state that in considering variances to the height of buildings or eave lines, we can consider access to light, protection of views, privacy for neighboring properties, and site constraints.
And of course, you know, as an SDAB, the MGA provides us guidance as to variances that we can grant if they, you know, meet certain criteria as described in the pertinent section, which of course give us, you know, quite a lot of ability to grant variances beyond the development officer, but we do have to take in impact on neighbors, etc. Okay.
Thank you.
When I was working on this, obviously I was in the same position as the applicant in terms of the LUB changing, and literally day to day the town website changing too. So most of my criteria are based on the time of application is what I thought would be the most relevant, and you know, rather than trying to blend the two.
Great, thank you. Mr. Drysick, do you have any more questions?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, any other board member have a question? All right, seeing none, thank you, Ms. Kupfer, for your presentation. Now I'm going to go to probably what is one of the more technically challenging elements of hearing, and that's hearing from people and bring them on screen, etc. So what I'm going to ask the clerk to do is to identify a person's name that you know is speaking in support of the appeal. And then we will have Ms. Dean bring them forward to be able to make their presentation. We'll turn on their video if they in fact have a video, or just turn on their audio if they're calling in.
Yeah, thank you. So we have Ken, I hope I say this right, McNair on the phone. And
Okay.
before we actually disconnect with him, I just wanted to make sure that we don't, if this is his only access to the meeting, I wanted to
Right.
make note of that so that Jane doesn't end the call and then he has no access, because I don't think he has a computer.
Okay, I'm actually fine with after somebody's made their presentation, if they would, let's just leave them in and leave it up to them if they would like to disconnect, as long as we're, turn off the video and turn off the audio at that point. So, Mr. McNair, can you hear us? Okay, I can see that you're talking, but I'm not picking up any audio here. Is there something that we can do technically here? I'm sorry, Mr. McNair, we're having some difficulties here. I see that your audio is on and that it says that you're speaking, but we're not able to hear anything. Do you have any mute or block on yourself on your phone? I would welcome any suggestions by our clerk or by Ms. Dean.
Yeah, I don't have a suggestion. I was just looking.
Hi, it's Jane Dean speaking. Yeah, I don't see any way to contact him. From my end, it looks like we have a connection with him. It's just, it's not coming through. I don't hear any voices or anything.
Right. Okay. Do we have a written, we do, I saw one of the letters in the package was from Mr. McNair. Is that correct?
That's right. I was going to say he did have a written submission.
Okay.
So we do
Okay.
have that from him. Unfortunate.
Okay, so with my apologies, Mr. McNair, and I hope that you've been able to hear things. Perhaps I'm hoping that your written submission will stand on its own, and we will certainly give that regard. And we thank you for joining the meeting. Ms. Miller, you had a suggestion?
Is it possible for Mr. McNair to hang up and call back in just to see if maybe that would?
Okay, let's
improve
try
the
that.
connection?
Yeah, Mr. McNair, if you could hang up and call back in, and then we will look for you in a few minutes after others have spoken to see if we could try hearing from you again. So let's proceed that way. And I would ask Ms. Noel then if you could identify the next person who is speaking in favor of the application.
Sorry to interrupt. I believe Ms. Comfort, I'm not sure if she has something to add, if she's able to contact him or knows she raised her hand.
Okay, yeah, Ms. Kupfer.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if I could try calling in on my cell, and then if it works, then I can have my husband take the cell over to Kent's house. He's just 2 doors down, because he is calling on a landline.
I see. All right. Yes, why don't you do that?
Okay.
And we will circle back to you or to your phone that dials in, and then hopefully hear from Mr. McNair at that point. Okay. So while that is happening, let's have the next person, Ms. Noel.
Yeah. So we have Steve Smith on the line. Yes. I guess he's on his computer, so he should be able to do audio.
Perfect.
Okay. Mr. Smith, thank you for joining this hearing. Please feel free to tell us or share your thoughts with us.
Well, thanks very much. I completely concur with the presentation that was Natalie Kupfer put together. I think she really addressed the issues that the neighbors have. I would actually like to say that this is a unique part of Canmore. I do not think that it's a one-size-fits-all situation where you can just treat this alley like a standard alley. And I would actually like to suggest that to get a sense of that, since there's a 2-week period of time after this hearing, I really would suggest that any of the planners and any of the staff who are going to be making this decision actually go down and stand on site, especially at 906 15th Street in the alley, and just get a sense for what we're trying to articulate here, because this alleyway is an alleyway, but it is very definitely our main street. This is our main access. And in that way, it's already feeling crowded, you know? So it really should be technically rezoned. At least that end of the alley should be rezoned to reflect the fact that it has its own unique character. And the fact that we don't have access for emergency vehicles when people are parking in the alley in that way that Ms. Comfort presented, that's a really important piece. We've had all sorts of little mishaps going on in that alleyway, including major gas leaks. Just watch what happens when you get a couple of the gas company vehicles trying to get down there when there's a whole lot of people parked in that alleyway. So I really think that this is a much bigger piece than the question of an oversized development. I actually think that this alley needs to be looked at under with some care and attention to the future, because it is not going to work for somebody to go and put another 2-story dwelling on the alley, and then the neighbor beside there will take that same discretion and do the same thing. And the next thing you know, we're going to have a gauntlet of 2-story dwellings on either side, and no one's going to have any views on the north side, as Ms. Comfort proposed or had in her presentation. So that I think that all I would add to this is the fact that we're creating a gauntlet, and it makes it extremely all of those aesthetic values that we cherish in Canmore are being compromised by these kinds of approvals. And that's all I could add. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Now, just to confirm, you're at, I can see by your letter in the package that you're at 905 16th Street.
That's correct.
Great. So you're in very close proximity to the development in question.
That's correct.
Great. And now I would look to my board members. Any questions that you have based on Mr. Smith's comments? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Smith. So what we are going to do is we are going to mute you and turn off your video since you've done your presentation, but we'll leave it up to you if you'd like to stay and listen in this regard, or if you would like to go to the live streaming. Great. Thank you. Ms. Noel, the next person speaking in favor of the appeal.
Yeah, so we have Hans-Peter Stettler, and unfortunately he wasn't able to connect. He's in Switzerland right now, but he did send me an email with something that he wanted me to present.
If you could please read that into the record for us, please.
So he said he is in favor of Natalie's appeal and has listed a few reasons. Dale and Doreen from across the street built a similar garage 2 to 3 years ago, and it is in my face. One of the other reasons was not sufficient parking. It took my view that they are marketing as stunning. It just overall increases the back alley traffic and puts the local school and preschool kids in danger. Let's not forget our so-called 16th Street really is a back alley. In wintertime, the alley is not plowed by the town, a chore I have taken on myself in the past few years. With more cars parked everywhere, that becomes trickier to manage. And that was his submission.
Great, thank you. And I see that he has a written submission in the package, and he's
That's
at
right.
901 16th Street.
I thought it was actually 902 16th Street.
Okay,
I'm just in his email.
Okay, I'm just looking at his letter. One of those two. All right. Do we have anybody else that is speaking in favor, or should we go back and see if we have gotten Mr. McNair?
Just looking on the participants, there was, yeah, so we can go back to Mr. McNair, please.
Okay, so Ms. Kupfer, how did we go with your phone? Is it Mr. McNair's on the
I'm
phone
afraid
now?
Ken is not feeling well, so he didn't want to touch my cell phone.
Okay.
So,
Okay, well, that's very, very considerate for our times. I see that Mr. McNair is now been, let's unmute him again. Let's just give one more opportunity to see if we can actually hear him on the phone. Mr. McNair, can you hear us? Well, this is very, very frustrating. Thank you for your patience and endurance, Mr. McNair. We're not able to hear you, but we do have your written comments, and thank you also for your consideration with regards to current situations and not, in respecting social distancing. So hopefully you can remain on the line and continue to listen to what's going on, but we do have your comments, and rest assured we are taking all comments that we receive, both verbal and written, into consideration when making our decision. I would turn back to Ms. Noel. Is there anyone else that's listed here in the viewing that you recognize as speaking for, or that you do not recognize at all? And we should perhaps touch base and see how they would like to speak.
Nope.
No? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So that being all of those that were in favor, I'm now going to ask you with regards to the correspondence, have we, other than the 10 letters that were in the package that were received in favor, have there been any other correspondence that's
There is not.
is received? Okay, so we will take the letters in the package as the correspondence in favor of the appeal. Okay, great, thank you. Now I'm going to call upon Mr. Bourget, who's been very patient, to make your comments that you would like the board to consider. Mr. Bourget.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Crossett, for this hearing. So first off, I'd like to read a letter regarding just a little presentation for myself here. So my name is Guy Bourget. First, I'd like to thank the town of Canmore for approving our development application and the SDAB for gathering here today. My family and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you regarding the development of our garden suite. A little bit about ourselves. Myself and my family have been living in Canmore for 23 years now. My wife has been here for 16 years, and we have 3 young children under the age of 12. We've both been contributing members of the community during this time. I also operate a local construction business, and my wife has been a realtor since 2005. Before moving to 15th Street, we own our last property on Moraine Road for 12 years. We invested greatly in our home, but knew there was a limitation for our growing family. We have worked incredibly hard and saved hard to be able to purchase a home on the valley floor, to be within walking distance to school and work, reducing our footprint and changing our lifestyle. We understand there has been overwhelming community support to increase housing in Canmore. There is also incredible pressure for sustainability, an effort to keep young families from leaving the Bow Valley. I understand the need for the town of Canmore to increase rental vacancy while providing affordability for the high cost of housing in the valley. There's a demand to build proper housing. We've submitted our development application in February to maximize the size of the rental unit we could provide the community while offsetting our cost. The town of Canmore approved the application, I might add. Understandably, we were disappointed to learn that our new neighbors felt differently and were opposed to the development. You can imagine our disappointment when we first heard of the proceeding initiated by a few of our new neighbors. Having moved in December, we haven't had a great deal of time to forge new relationship with our neighbors, but I did personally take the time to introduce myself and inform them of our future development plans. In the initial application process, we have listened to the concern brought forth by our neighbor and worked hard at our cost to amend our plan accordingly. We adjusted the suite deck and window to address privacy concern. However, it appears there has been a history of collusion and anti-change in our street. Past development have faced the same challengers as we have here today. Unfortunately, there have been many discussions had unknowing to us, discussion we were willing to participate in. In the spirit of this community, we fear the set of precedent when, as homeowners, we were called to action to provide more housing, only to be challenged every step of the way. As a parent of 3 young children, safety is the utmost importance to us and will continue to be moving forward. We would, of course, not engage in anything that would decrease safety for our children or the little ones who might come to play or live nearby. Neighborhood safety is paramount, and we will all benefit by looking out for each other's children. We have been open-minded from the beginning and hope that the board will recognize our effort and our continued willingness to work together. Thank you. So this is a letter that my wife and I wrote, regarding like, this is very uncommon for you guys to basically to give an answer to the appeal because of the timelines of the application and now to the appeal, because we were under the old land use bylaw and we have obliged to all the bylaws except for 2 variances, which is the lot coverage, which is minimal to my opinion, as we don't affect any of the neighbors around by having 1% extra of lot coverage. And secondly, the size of the unit compared to the main dwelling, which in the old land use bylaw was not able to be taller than the main dwelling. So under these 2 variances, I find that the appellant have touched very little on those specific 2 as the application was submitted in all those letters, the 10 letters. So I find that there is very little touching both of them, both variances. Now, under the new land use bylaw, I'm left now with 4 different variances, which, like Mrs. Ramos has clearly stated, I was not able to address. Now, out of the 4, I feel that I can address at this moment, and you can put it as a condition on your approval, would be the 2 parking stalls. I'm actually willing to put 5 parking stalls into the side of the garage on the west side of the actual garden suite.
Mr. Bourget,
yes.
Mr. Bourget, you're referring to bike parking stalls?
The bike parking stalls, correct.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to offer more parking stalls than the 2. For one, because I was never given the chance to address this specific variance. So this is now my time to do so. So I'm willing to give a minimum of 2 for sure, if not more. And that would be on the west side of the garden suite. Secondly, regarding the dormer size, I can address that as well with changing a couple of things on the plan. And again, I was not giving the chance, and I've received those 4 new variances as of Thursday, a week ago. So I was never able to address those. So the second one, which is the dormer size, I would be more than willing to change to oblige the bylaw regarding those dormer size facing my property on the south side. Regarding the 50 square meters versus 40 square meters allowed right now with the new land use bylaw, when we moved from Moraine Road, which we were on Moraine Road, and we saw really quickly, well, it took us a while, but like with a growing family, as we have 3 young children, we saw the need for more space, more of a yard, more more space in our home. And so this is the reason why we moved downtown, and to also offset the cost of obviously by building a garden suite to be able to afford living here as well. So regarding the 50 meters, when we moved in December, in mid-December, we went ahead with a development permit because we wanted to have this 50 square meters of living space, so we could actually build something that would be good for a tenant, like for a professional couple that would want to live downtown. And so the 50 square meters we are able to actually put a 1-bedroom suite with a laundry, self-sufficient completely. And that's one thing that we've wanted to achieve before April 1st, because we didn't want to have a 40 square meters to, I think with 430 square feet, it would be really difficult to build a 1-bedroom suite versus a bachelor suite. So this is the reason why we try to go as fast as we can by moving in mid-December, applying actually on January 31st, which February 1st, they received the application. We wanted to go ahead and apply under the old land use bylaw so we can actually build a 50 square meters. And this is the reasoning behind it. For the height of the garden suite, at the time, we have made plans for 6.5 meters, as it was, we were allowed to build, to put forward some plan at 6.5 meters, because that's what the bylaw was saying. Regarding the height of the dwelling, which is under the old land use bylaw as well, regarding the height of the garden suite versus the dwelling, it is a raised bungalow and it's in an older neighborhood. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, so
yes, we can.
Okay, so regarding that, it's an older neighborhood, and I have a feeling this is why the town has approved our application, is because it's an older neighborhood. And in the future, we have, like in a few years, we are planning to build a new house as well on this property. And regarding the old land use bylaw, again with the 10% versus the 11%, I wanted to keep the existing slab that's there, to not dispose of the slab and get the landfill to give more stuff to the landfill. So I wanted to keep the slab, and this is why we wanted to increase the size of the garden suite by 6 inches on either side, which brings it up to an extra 1% on that matter. So, and to finish, so not to finish, but to reiterate about the height. This is the reason why we applied before April 1st, is to have a 6.5 meters and a 50 square meters. As of the other two variances that I'm asking for right now, not knowingly, I might add, is that those other two variances, which the dormer and the parking stall for bicycle, I will address into the building permit. But for the height and for the square meters, I would like the appeal board to grant me the variances for those two variances, and to grant me the okay. As well as another thing too is the appellant also is going against. I do understand that their point, and I feel for them as well. But at the end of the day, I'm just reading here a little bit. I feel, yeah, excuse me. And oh yeah, so Canmore actually on their website, they give grant for the garden suites, and they are pushing forward the garden suites, and they want tenants. They want to increase the density on the R1 area. So regarding the 1 story, the reason why we chose to do a 2-story is because under the bylaw, we are not able to put the garage in the front yard because less than 50% of our neighbors have their garage in their front yard. So we would not be able to put a garage. And as everybody knows in this town, there's a lot of gear and a lot of stuff, especially having 3 young kids. There's a lot of bicycle, a lot of ski gear, a lot of stuff, and we would need a garage. So regarding that 1-story suite, I don't think it would fit for a family. And this is one reason we want to go with a 1.5 story. Yeah, and it's now permitted as well. So that's one reason why we would not be able to build just a single story. Backyard versus front yard. Yeah, like I have changed my design to increase the rear setback for 2 meters as they were as originally we were. So I did work with the appellant to raise their to address their concerns in 3 ways. The first one was to move the garden suite for 2 meters setback to the back alley. Again, like Mrs. Tupfer has raised the point of, we have raised the window for their privacy. We've raised the window to a 5'6", or I can't remember, 5'6" or 5'8", so the tenant would not be able to look into her backyard. And the thirdly, we've raised also the banister or the deck railing, and we made it more of a privacy wall, so the tenant would not be able to look in their yard. So yeah, like all in all, I think I was thrown a little bit of a curveball because this is it's not a regular SDAB, as we're going from an old land use bylaw to a new land use bylaw. But so I was thrown a little bit of a curveball. But I'm ready to work with the appeal board with their conditions. And one last point is, we have tried to talk, to the neighbors, but no neighbors ever came and talked to us about the development. And everything was made into it was made on their own, and I was never able to connect with any one of them for their concerns. So now I hear the concerns, but a little too late, I guess. But I would have liked to have a discussion, as I had a discussion with them regarding the development that we wanted to do on this property. So this is my case, and yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Bourget, for all of your comments, and all of those comments will be considered by the board. I would like to ask my fellow board members if anybody would like to ask questions. If you could just identify yourself by raising your hand. Mr. Birch, go ahead.
Yes, I think I have 2 questions of Mr. Bourget. Number one, is this a 2-story building, or do you believe this is a 1-story building and a loft?
With all the bylaws that are written, this is a 1.5 stories, a story and a loft, correct? It's not a 2-story building per se. It is a story plus a loft. And why we are going that route, as I'm going to say it again, is because we're not able to put the garage into the front yard. So we have to put the garage in the back. So by having a garage, we have to put the suite onto the 2nd floor, or onto it's basically a loft. It's not a second story. It's a loft, correct?
And if I may explore that, just why do you think of that as a loft and not what I would see as a 2nd story?
Because the bylaw is stating that it is a story plus a loft. So I see it as a loft. It's up for debate, I guess, but I see it as I see it as a loft as the town sees it as a loft as well.
If I may, I see Adam has his hand.
Go ahead.
Chairman, the second question, just can, Mr. Bourget, can you talk about the parking space, the third outside the garage parking space? And Ms. Kiefer or Coffer said there are some, and she showed pictures where you can't even really open the vehicle's doors because the space is narrow. You might meet the parking requirements of the bylaw, but practically because of the walls and the fences that you can't do it. Where exactly was this third parking space, and are the doors of, say, a truck or an SUV that would be parked there, could you open them?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. A parking stall, I think a parking stall is, Mr. Ramos can correct me, but a parking stall is I think it's 3 meters. I think Mrs. Kupfer is more referring to the Hildebrand garden suite, that the stairs were facing, they were encroaching into the space where the parking stall was supposed to be. But if you look at the picture again, the stairs are from the alley up. My staircase is from the lot, from my lot up towards the back alley. So underneath, you can actually park the car underneath the stairs, and with that, you're able to open the doors, because I think I'm at 3.69 meters to the side yard. So it is an actual parking stall. And furthermore, because we're living here and we're here to stay. Again, as having 3 young kids, the high school is a block away, and we're here to stay. So we're going to be here for a while. So regarding the people that park in the back alley, we living here will be able to monitorize that, and making sure that the tenant of the actual garden suite would have to oblige to what we're asking. Otherwise, otherwise we'd have to do something about it, right? So by living here, we would be able to monitorize where they're parking, and that specific spot where you can open both doors would be dedicated for their vehicle.
I would just the drawings that I believe that are being referred to is in our package at page 33. There's a drawing showing a vehicle underneath the stairwell, and on the upper one you can see the spot where it would be. And then on page 36 with the survey plan, it's in the top right corner of the lot, marked gravel parking.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and it does show it's 3.47. I didn't see that initially, but when Mr. Bourget said that the car pulls in under the stair, that helped me a lot. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay. Now I know that Mr. Drysick has a question, and I just want to make sure, Mr. Bourget, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just having a little difficulty. As long as you can hear me, it's all.
Yeah.
I can't see anyone anymore. But yeah.
Okay, well, go ahead, Mr. Drysick, and ask your question.
Back to the height, can you please clarify, when you're asking for the 6.5 meters, are you saying that it's not possible to build an accessory dwelling unit on top and keep a garage? Or are you saying that those 6.5 meters are necessary to build the type of dwelling that you have planned for the tenants that you imagine?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What again, you have to understand that the plan was forwarded before April 1st. So again, I was not able to address the specific variance. No, I'm not saying that a garden suite can't be built in the 6-meter height. That's correct. But under the application, at the time of the application, the bylaw was 6.5 meters, which that's what I've put on the plan, to have a 6.5 meter height, which I was complying with the bylaws at the time. But as of as of Thursday last week, when I received the email from Mrs. Ramos, sorry, I have found myself with a new variance.
Thank you.
Everybody's still there?
Yes.
Okay, I can't see or hear anybody.
Yeah.
Okay, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was on mute, and as long as we can still hear you, I know we've lost video. So are there any other questions from the board? Oh, yes, Mr. Birch. You're muted still.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to this loft issue, and just to Mr. Bourget, do you know how much of the top floor is the hostess? Sorry.
Thank you.
I don't know what that was. Do you know how much area the upper area, the second story loft, is a proportion to the lower area? And the question I'm asking is because the land use bylaw says there's a 60% ratio between the loft floor area and the lower floor area. And probably if administration knows the answer, they could probably pitch in too. I'm just curious. And underlying this, Mr. Chairman, I just really want to be sure that this is a loft and not a second story.
Again, it's tough. It's the land use bylaw state like a story and a half, which or a loft, a story plus, I mean, the garage or the lower level plus a loft. Like it is a loft. Obviously, it's this. You can call it a second story, but in the land use bylaw they call it a loft. And I am following the bylaw, the land use bylaw, and it is it's debatable. I think that the town can the town has put forward this new land use bylaw with a garage with a suite above the garage, and as called as a loft, and it is a loft. Like if you look at the square footage at 538 square feet, which is 538 square feet is 50 meters square. It is a loft. And it's the roof line they come down to create. And then there's dormers as well in the design that it's basically a loft.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question? Excuse me. Did I answer your question?
I'm probably asking a question that's very hard to answer on the fly if you don't have the answer in front of you. But it's a comparison between the floor area of the upper level and the floor area of the lower level. The bylaw I can see has a 60% maximum ratio, and I'm just wondering if we're going to meet that.
I think,
and I am sympathetic to the fact that everybody's dealing with a new bylaw, and especially the transition that's occurred between when the application was made and what you're dealing with in terms of a board hearing based on the new bylaw. So
I'd ask Ms. Ramos-Strankman to please provide some information with respect to Mr. Birch's question.
Yes, I don't have the exact measurements available right in front of me. However, Greg, I think that you're referencing maybe a different section. I've just reviewed the land use bylaw, and specifically what it says for detached accessory dwelling units is that the loft floor shall not be larger than 80% of the gross floor area of the lower story, not 60%.
Ah, that's helpful. If that's the case, I've misread that. Thank you very much.
That's section 8.4.3.3, unless you were looking at a different section.
No, that's where I would have been looking.
But the variance that we are looking at is showing that floor area is, I think the percentage was 23 or 25% larger than is allowed by the bylaw.
23.
Yeah, 23%.
23, but as the current bylaw, as the old bylaw, I was complying with the old bylaw.
Right,
the
right.
Bylaw, I'm not anymore. As again, on Thursday, I received a an email stating that.
And I also want to echo Mr. Birch's comment there about and your comment as well. You recognize we're in an unusual situation here in which, unfortunately, we need to be looking at the new bylaw that's in effect and having regard for that and determining whether we're willing to grant a variance to that. And this, you got your application in under the old bylaw, which I imagine if there hadn't been an appeal and COVID and who knows what, as far as the timing goes, you might have been, you would have just been under the old regime. But we are in fact, don't have flexibility to simply look at the old bylaw. We have to regard for the new one. Yeah. And I know you understand that. It's just it is a very strange situation.
And this is why I addressed the other two variances. The other two variances I address, I can change it really easily on, as Mrs. Ramos has said, I can, a building permit, I could address those variances or condition as the appeal board would put on their report.
Yeah, and just to paraphrase what I heard in that regard is that you think that if we were to approve this and add the conditions to add a minimum of 2 bike parking stalls and as well to reduce the dormer size to meet the bylaw, that would be something that you would be able to do.
That's correct. Yes.
Right. Great. Do I have any other questions from members of my board? Seeing none, I will now ask Ms. Noel if there are any others that you are aware of that are on this call that are speaking in opposition to the appeal.
There are not.
There are not. And do we have any correspondence in opposition to the appeal?
We received none.
Okay. Now I understand that we have one person that on the call that would like to make some comments in a neutral fashion, neither for or against, but would like to provide comments to the board. And I believe that's Ms. Stark. If we could unmute her and put her on the screen. And great. Thank you, Ms. Stark, for joining the hearing. Please provide us your comments.
Thank you, Sean. And I'm very, I can appreciate how tough this decision is for all of you because there's a lot of factors involved. So I am a direct neighbor to Guy Bourget, and I live right beside in 926. I have lived in this house for 23 years, for approximately 35. And I wrestled with this. I chose to speak, I made an intentional choice to speak in a neutral capacity to the appeal for a couple of reasons. One is that I haven't been involved in all the details of the approval in the appeal, didn't have all the information, and I've learned a lot listening tonight. And secondly, because I have found it very awkward with the black and white nature of the support versus against, and what that does to neighbor dynamics. And I recognize in this particular case that already there are some polarizing of dynamics, and Guy has expressed that as well in his experience. So that's why I'm talking in a neutral capacity here. And yet I wanted to, and so I'm not representing other people. I'm able to just say what my experience is with this and give you a sense of the impacts or not on me. And so essentially, I'm going to talk points at a couple levels. The first level is around the larger picture that was described about secondary suites, garden suites in this area, the nature of our particular neighborhood. And I agree fully with my neighbors who have all expressed a real fondness and a real passion for the character of our neighborhood and the dynamics as neighbors that we've had over time. It's very important to all of us. And I respect the concerns that people have around change and build out in this neighborhood. And yet for me personally, I am 100% support in the town's efforts to allow for and encourage garden suites. I believe that as a way of addressing our longstanding affordability issues, that we need to have options like this. And I don't feel that it is right to take homeowners' rights away in order to do that, even though that does mean change in neighborhoods. And I really feel that that change needs to be managed and decisions are made in a way that minimizes the changes and addresses character in neighborhoods as much as possible. But I'm not against the fact that this is happening and this is being built. And then the second piece I would like to say is that it is regard to my own personal interactions and my own personal concerns as a neighbor. I've been able to have a couple good conversations, at least, if not more, with Guy and his family. And the first one gave me a general impression of what they were planning to do in the area. And I got a good sense of that. And I thought, okay, things are happening. That's just the way it is. And I'm gonna do what I can to learn about it and support and have a good relationship there. And the second conversation, I was learning more about what was happening around the issues of the appeal. And I was able to ask my own questions around my concerns, one of which was the management of parking in the back alley, recognizing all the concerns you've heard so far about the back alley. And I was able to be assured through Guy that the parking spot and the way they would manage that parking spot by living in the home themselves addressed my concerns there. And the second part was my own view and my own sense of this mass beside me, and the concern I have of a big tree that is a nice sort of filter for me, or it blocks the views, and that tree seems like it'll stay intact. And for me, then personally, I don't feel I will be negatively affected by the particular building, the two buildings, new buildings that will be going up beside me. And so I just wanted to sort of go on record saying that not everybody sort of experiences this in the same way. And the aspect of where I live, which is directly west, I don't have the same kind of impacts that other neighbors have. And then the last thing I'll say is that in having had already some friendly and civil conversations with Guy, I have a pretty good sense that he's responsive and that he would work to manage the situation should issues come up. And I think that that's an important thing to be able to know, is that it's not, some of these concerns that are coming forward are not just about the technical variances, they're about how what will change in our neighborhood around safety concerns, et cetera. And I think that we need to have the ability to talk to each other about that and manage that as a community as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Stark. I appreciate your comments very much. Just a note on a couple of things that you mentioned. I very much appreciated that you're bringing a different perspective, and you also see the issues being raised by various sides. And I also don't like a black or white and us versus them type scenario, and hopefully but we do have to make a decision here. One thing to note, though, is we do have to, and I agree, it's important to talk to neighbors, but we have to make, of course, decisions based on, regardless of who owns the property, and regardless of whether they're a nice person or not a nice person, and whether they're easy to deal with or not. And so we will be making a decision based purely on the planning aspects and the evidence that's been provided by all those who have provided lots of good information for us to consider, and then we'll make a decision there. But I just wanted to say that some of the most valuable comments, or interesting comments I should say, in these hearings come from those who wish to be neutral, because they're able to go into a little bit of a different area. So thank you very much for your comments. I would look to my board members to see if they have any questions for Ms. Stark. Seeing none, thank you very much. And once again, we will mute you and turn off the video, but please feel free to stay on the call and hear the remainder of the hearing. Now I would ask Ms. Noel if there is anyone else that you know of that would like to speak, or if there's been any other correspondence received in a neutral fashion.
No, there is not. And I'm just double checking my email to make sure no one has requested. Nope, that's all I have.
All right, well, I'm going to make a, now is Miss Ramos Strankman still there? Oh, I see that she's just had her video
Yeah, I'm
come up.
still here. It looks like my video got turned off. I think maybe Jane did it when she
Okay.
closed the remarks.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you're still there, because I would like to ask administration if you have any closing remarks, comments, or clarification.
Yes, I have a few comments just to share. I'm going to share my screen quickly. I should have explained this earlier. And although the property in question is in an R1 district, there's actually a DC district on the far east side of the street that addresses 2 lots there. I think historically it was regarding their creek setback, being so close to the creek.
Right,
So
okay.
I just want to provide that clarity there.
Okay. It doesn't affect the zoning on this particular one. It's just clarifying that not the whole area is R1, correct?
Yeah, just we referenced R1 a few times, so I just want to provide that clarity to the board.
Okay, thank you.
I also want to just clarify that it has been touched on, but the original application did go through some changes until a decision was made. The original building was located slightly closer to their rear yard setback and had a slightly lower privacy wall and a slightly bigger window facing the lane. However, based on the comments received from neighbors, the applicant made revisions to remove that variance for that rear yard setback and to minimize the window and increase the privacy screen as a way to address that.
And I think those were what Mr. Bourget was also referencing, so thank you.
Yeah. I also just want to note that the appellant in their presentation referenced a section 11 of the land use bylaw. They were specifically talking about views. And I just want to clarify that section 11 is our architectural controls, and they're not necessarily applicable to every residential area. They're really meant for the industrial, commercial, and larger multifamilies, and it doesn't apply to an R1 district. However, that's section 1 where views and such come into the consideration of height variances does still apply. So I just want to elaborate on that one.
And I would just add on that point, but of course the SDAB must give regard to the impact on neighbors pursuant to the MGA requirements set upon us if we're going to be granting variances, and we need to take that into account. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Just specific to that one section.
Yes, great, thank you. Yeah.
And finally, again, just want to talk about the comments around parking and snow removal and access from the lane. I want to explain that planning doesn't necessarily look at the enforcement or snow removal of things going on the lane. We have separate venues for how to address those, and it's not necessarily something that comes into the review of the application as a parking stall has been provided, whether it's going to be used properly or not. That could be the same for any site, and it's not necessarily something that comes in. As long as it's being provided, we consider the regulation being met.
Right, and then it becomes a bylaw issue.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And just a question: when the permits come in, do they go through a review of other departments to make sure there's compliance with emergency access, etc.?
Yeah, so in this, every application is a little bit different. In this specific case, we circulated the application to our engineering department, and then after additional feedback from affected neighbors, I did circulate it to our streets and roads department to gain a better understanding of the history of the concerns on this site and other issues that have come up.
Great, thank you. Anything else you would like to add?
I think those are all my comments, but I believe my superiors also have some closing comments that they wish to.
Okay, am I looking to Mr. Henry or Ms.
Yes, I will add to that. I just want to reiterate here, just the nature of the process that we're in. I guess that feel like I'm like forced against here, because the application was made February 1st, and the appeal was made at the end of March, which leads us into this this new realm of land use bylaw 2018-22, and that it is really an unfortunate situation. And like he has said, he wasn't given the opportunity to make any of these I guess to like address any of the variances which were identified to him on Thursday. And that's just the nature of the process. You know, there is no opportunity, unfortunately, at this time, you know, for him to make those changes like prior to the hearing. So I just wanted to reflect that whole, you know, like the matter, because that wasn't, you know, an error of administration. It's just the nature of, you know, the situation we're in and the timing of the appeal. With that too, you know, if the board is, you know, considering approving the application with conditions to reflect, you know, the variances which are now in effect under the new land use bylaw, any of those changes would actually be required to happen at the like the DP stage, not at the building permit stage, because what you would be approving would need to be reflected on the development and permit plans itself. So just keep that in mind as you guys are making your decisions there. And then I also just want to speak to the nature of this district as well. You know, the R1 district. You know, we've done like a bunch of engagement with new land use bylaw, with suites in particular, and there's also lots of engagement that we did around, you know, like driveway access and, you know, predominant like patterns on, you know, existing block faces. And that has, you know, like led us with new land use bylaw, you know, to require, you know, like the lane access for suites and garages to be coming off the lane unless there is a predominant like pattern on the actual block. So as you see redevelopment on this block, you know, whether it's you know, a suite in the rear yard, or it's, you know, like a tear down of an old, you know, like house and the rebuild of like something new, we are going to continue to see access off the lane. And I don't, you know, want to like disregard any of, you know, the issues that are happening in the back lane, you know, with regards, you know, to overflow parking and, you know, the access issues that could potentially come into play with emergency vehicles. But that's not something that we look at through land use bylaw. And as Camila, you know, had mentioned, you know, there's other avenues on which we need to go about that. And if that is a concern, I would, you know, for sure expect, you know, that the neighborhood come forward to the town and make that case, because there are things that we, you know, I can do to address that. But again, that's falling outside of the realm of this development permit. Beyond that, I would also just like to note that through the, you know, the implementation of the new land use bylaw, as you all are aware, which came into effect on April 1st, we did lots of engagement and messaging out to the industry, and we let everyone, you know, be fully aware that, you know, we could actually see some potential issues with developments, you know, that would be appealed under the old land use bylaw, depending on the timing and nature of it, you know, which is why we had these application submission date requirements in place and messaged out to the industry, just so that everyone is fully aware, you know, that there is a risk, you know, that if you apply under the old bylaw and it is approved at the end of March or somewhere in the middle of March, you know, scheduling an SDA like a board hearing, it would actually fall into April when the new land use bylaw is in place, and that could create some issues on the application as we're seeing now. So I just like you all to keep that in mind as you go forward, you know, with the application and making a decision here.
Appreciate those comments. And just to summarize what was, you know, provided to us before, I mean, the options before the board are to approve the appeal and thereby deny the development permit, or deny the appeal with conditions or even revised conditions. And if we did approve the appeal, then presumably that puts the applicant back to square one, and if they wanted to develop, they'd have to bring in a new development permit application. Great.
That is correct.
Correct. Okay, thank you. Ms. Sanford, did you have a question? Or yes, go ahead.
I have a question for planning. And Ms. Ramos-Strankman brought up the recognition that there's 2 lots that are DC district on that laneway.
Yes.
And the appellant mentioned that there are 5 houses in that same situation. So there's 5 houses, but only 2 of the lots are in the DC zone. Is that correct?
Yes, only 2 of those lots are in that DC district.
But there's actually 5 houses that front exclusively onto the alley.
Yes, that DC district wasn't made for with that in mind. It has a different history that only affected that one with regards to redevelopment on that parcel.
But essentially, there are 5 houses on that street that exclusively front onto that alley. Isn't that kind of an unusual situation?
You could look at Mallard Alley too. That one's one that comes to mind. We have all sorts of weird and interesting lots in Canmore.
Yeah. So essentially, they developed with the creek setback consideration because there's a creek or a water course or something running behind that property.
Mm-hmm.
So they couldn't put a regular road, but somehow those lots got zoned and redeveloped and built houses on with only an alley access.
Yes.
Is that correct? So it was one of those situations where somebody had an idea to build these houses, but the constriction was just alley access?
Yeah, I don't know the exact history of each individual lot in that predicament. Some of those houses are quite old and may have just been approved under a very different land use bylaw, and they're now possibly existing non-conforming with maybe the exception of the DC district. I haven't explored the details to elaborate on that more here.
Okay, I just wasn't aware that there was such a circumstance and that somehow impacts the alley differently than in other places. So thank you.
Just to add to that as well, Vi, as per the MGA, we only need to require one access point into a lot. So whether or not you have front drive or lane access, as long as you have access, there's no issues with planning.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Birch. If you could unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. This bylaw transition is a huge one, and it's a new bylaw, and so I recognize you'll have learning. So I'm just going to ask planning department's opinion about what the intent was as I look at the definition of loft, the accessory dwelling unit issues, and that 80% issue, and I can see where the 80% comes from, but there is a 60%. So when I look at section 843, and this is addressed again to the planning department, I get the sense that an accessory dwelling unit detached, and this is 8431A, may be provided in a 1-story or a 1-story plus loft form and may be located above a garage. So that's a broad sense of what I would expect to see. And then the table below says, there's a maximum height for a 1-story building. And then there's another maximum height for a 1-story plus loft. So that's the concept. And then later in that section, this is 8433B, it says the upper loft story of an accessory dwelling unit. So the upper loft story of the accessory dwelling unit shall not be larger than 80% of the gross floor area of the lower story. But then, and excuse me while I just look at my other tool here, but then if I look at the definition of loft, a loft means the floor space above the eave line and within the pitch of the roof of a building. So is this a loft or is it a second story? And then this definition of loft says the floor area of a loft measured to the walls or where the roof lines meet the floor shall not exceed 60% of the area of the floor below the loft. So the 80-60%, one talks about the definition of a loft, that's a 60, the 80% talks about how much loft you can have in a dwelling unit. So I haven't made up my mind on this issue, of course, yet, but I'm just perplexed, of course. And so if I can hear from the planning department about what's going on here, and the 60-80%, is this a loft? What's the intention behind the bylaw, if you can reveal that? Thank you.
Who would like to take that?
No, that's a good question, but I think Marcus can maybe talk more specifically about the loft.
Yeah, take this one for sure. So there's two sides of this, Greg. I'm just gonna wonder if I can share my screen with you here. Just give me a quick second here. Here we go. Share. Everyone can see my screen there. Greg, and I believe this here is the clause that you're looking at, with regards, to reference of a loft. Ideally, what we would be looking at here is, the upper story. Called the definition of loft, which you've referenced, is meant to be applied in other situations. It could be arguably applied, to like a detached suite. But the intent here is really, to look at the upper story to make sure that the upper, level is not exceeding, the 80% or that 40 meters squared. And why we went this way was to address exactly what, we're hearing today is that, there's concerns with like the size of suites, that are on top of garages, the massing is too big, it's taking up too much of the views, that everybody in this town loves. And that's what we tried, to do here with this. Could we clarify this a little bit, clearer on going forward and, separate, the word loft, from this, specific clause? Sure. And that's just one of the things, as we're going through the review of land use bylaw and we get new applications in, we're going to see a bunch of things, which aren't really working. And that's sort of the growing pains of a new land use bylaw, unfortunately. It's like, it's almost a 500 page document. Well, it's actually more than 500 pages. And, it's not going to be the perfect, solution to all of the issues that we're seeing in town. So the intent here is to really look at the upper floor. We will look at whether or not we need to revise this to provide some clarity moving forward. I think, with the omnibus revisions that we hope to get, in front of council by the end of the year. But the intent here is really looking at the upper floor and trying to reduce the massing of that upper floor, by limiting that space to 40 meters squared, which was previously allowed to be 50. Does that provide some clarity for you?
Yes, thank you. I agree. Having written bylaws before of this nature, it's really hard, and you get things that come out of the woodwork 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 months after you've written them. So I'm not surprised by that. And your answer helped me. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Scott. I'm sorry, we can't hear you, Harry. We can't hear you. Were you, did you have your headphones plugged in before? Yeah. Maybe try, it's okay. One thing you may want to try is unplugging your headphones and just see if you can pick up on your computer. And now you have to unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
There we are.
Yeah, there we go. Now we can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My question was just strictly, if this was a new development, you would, I think the planning department would require building mass diagrams from what I know. And I'm wondering why that isn't required on something like this.
Okay.
So it's not normal for us to be requesting massing diagrams for an accessory dwelling unit. It's specifically mentioned in the old bylaw when a low sloped roof pitch was being proposed. So something like a flat roof, 112, something like that. The bylaw has changed. And so I believe that's been removed as a requirement, but still a request that administration might request if the situation arose. But again, with this roof pitch, it was an 812. So a more traditional roof pitch. It wasn't that low slope roof pitch that we would normally see those massing diagrams be provided for.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there's no more questions from the board to administration, okay, I will now ask the appellant if, Ms. Kupfer, if you have any closing remarks, comments, or clarification.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
So I am a little confused at this stage. So at the present time, it is a 50 square meter proposal. The bylaw wants it to be a 40 meter square proposal. We don't know the size of the garage, but I would assume that it's 50 square meters. And then 80% of 40 square meters with the 23% over, where like nobody's kind of given a hard number on that. That would be one comment. I would like to get a hard number on that. With regards to parking and Mr. Bourget, policing his own parking, the other two alley suites that we showed parking issues with are homeowner occupied, and they don't police their own. It's quite a difficult thing to do, particularly on a daily basis. And if you orient your lifestyle towards the street as opposed to the alley, which most of the occupants on 15th Street do. I would also like to comment on the fact that when I did talk to the town, to Camilla, I had talked to Mr. Bourgeot in the alley at one point in time, end of the summer, I think, and he was very honest with me about his proposal and talked about his new house as well in the future. He did, however, suggest to me that his suite would not affect me at all. But anyway, going back to his new house, when we did talk to Camilla at the town office, she said that any reference to a new building, a second building, be it whatever it is irrelevant to this DP. So in terms of the suite being taller than the existing building, the relative age of the existing building and whether or not in the future at some time it becomes a new building isn't really relevant to this application. Am I correct?
Yeah, so that was specific to the height variance under the old land use bylaw. We were only looking at application for a new detached accessory dwelling unit. There was no indication on the plans for a new principal dwelling unit to be built on site. And so we could not consider that in our rationale. That's why the height variance was still listed as a variance, regardless of the property owner's intent to build something more. It's simply not on the plans and not considered as part of the application. Yeah.
So therefore, this suite is still setting precedence in town as being taller than the existing residence.
What we are having to look at is a variance in the new bylaw of being 0.5 meters higher than is allowed by the bylaw. So with regards to the height, it's no longer relative to the principal residence. It's now set as a height that it has to meet depending on the slope of the roof. With regards to your first question about massing, we are this board is being asked to consider whether or not a variance of an additional 10 meters square above the 40 meters square is allowable or not. So that is the number that we're looking at, and that is what we are determining whether that's reasonable or not. And as far as the parking question that you rose, what we have to look at is whether there is sufficient parking allowed, whether it's actually used for that. That is then becomes a neighborhood issue in which they can call bylaw if they have concerns. We just have to make sure that what is planned is either meets the bylaw, or any variance that is allowed is done so for good reason, good planning reason. Does that address the three items that you were
Well,
raised?
other than the fact that we have talked to bylaw, the town and the RCMP, and their response is that it's an alley. And so they don't post speeding signs, they don't do photo radar, they don't issue parking. That's what I just said. Or radar, regular radar. So those things we have addressed in the past with the town, the RCMP and bylaw to no avail. So just as an information point.
Sure.
And then I'm not a lawyer, but it would seem to me, well, as you can see, the emphasis in my presentation was on the fact that all the wording in the bylaws, as far as I'm concerned as a non-lawyer, have equal weight. And it's not just about measurements or heights or variances. It's about a whole lot more. It's about the whole town, right? And all of our feelings about our town and protecting our town and protecting our residents, all of us. And I'm just wondering, in terms of literally the law, what weight do words have that are emotive as opposed to dimensions? What's the difference?
Right. I would just let you know that when the board considers any decision that involves a variance, we have great power to grant variances and to move away from bylaws. But what we need to do is we need to take a look at the bylaw, need to take a look at the intent. You raised some very good points in that regard, and those words do speak to the intent. But we also take a look at the use and enjoyment and impact on neighbors, which you also addressed in your presentation. So we take a look, we take into account all of that as we are deciding whether a variance is something that we're willing to grant or not.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that's pretty much covers it for me.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Does the board have any questions arising from those comments from Ms. Kupfer? Seeing none, thank you very much. Put you back on mute. Well, Mr. Bourget, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Great, now it's your opportunity. Do you have any closing remarks, comments, or clarification that you would like to provide?
At this moment, I just want to thank the board for looking at this, obviously, and I do appreciate the concerns of the neighborhood. But I think we're now that this at the time of the application was an discretionary use, yeah. At the time it was that, and now it is a permitted use. So I just want to raise the point that in the near future we move down here to because coming from Moraine Road, we were maxed out on everything we did, and we moved here. We worked really hard to come to the valley floor, and we do want to, the main goal of this place, and with the bylaws that were at the time, we were able to build a garden suite, and the town is actually for the garden suites. So I just want to point out that this is what we're here for. We want to build a garden suite we would also like the neighbors to bring their point to us, so we can actually have a conversation with them. And instead of going through the appeal board and through the all that stuff. So it would be really nice, as a friendly neighbor as we are with our family and all that stuff, it would be good to have a conversation instead of having everybody gather together against one person that's moved in the neighborhood and say, welcome to the neighborhood. So in the near future, this is the plan that we have. I made it very clear and very forward that to Ms. Cupford that this was the plan that we were doing, and our plan hasn't changed. So in regards of the discretionary and now the permitted use, we are still moving forward in that regard. For the appeal board, thank you for listening to our concerns and to listening to everybody's concerns. And we appreciate your time, and we hope that that we've made a good point. And thank you for your time.
Mr. Bourget, we've certainly heard a lot of good points from a lot of people that we will be taking into account. Do any of the board members have any questions arising from Mr. Bourget's comments? Seeing none. Now I just have a question for each of Ms. Kupfer and Mr. Bourget. I'm going to start with Ms. Kupfer. We're just about to close the hearing, at which point the board will then consider all of the evidence that we've heard, and in accordance with provincial legislation, we will decide what we're going to do in this matter. So before I close it, though, I want to ask you, do you feel like you've had a fair hearing?
Yes, I do.
Great, thank you. And thank you. And Mr. Bourget, the same question to you. Do you feel like you've had a fair hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much to both of you, and to all of those that provided comments, both verbal and written. And thank you to town administration for all of the information that you've provided. I'm now going to declare that this hearing is now concluded. And in accordance with provincial legislation, the board is required to hand down its decision within 15 days from today's date. No decision is binding until the board issues a written decision. Now, it is our practice to try to greatly beat that 15 days. So we're hoping that you'll have something maybe as early as next week. So we will now continue to do our work in that regard. And I would now like to make a motion for adjournment of today's hearing. I now ask the question to all my board members. All those in favor? And I see that that is carried unanimously. So thank you very much, everyone. Just so that everyone knows, we are going to remain streaming here as we move into our business meeting, which is approving past minutes and of that nature. Not quite as riveting as the types of information you've heard. And I know that everybody's been very patient in this 2.5 hour exercise. And so I imagine that some people are probably either going to want to eat dinner or take a personal break or whatever. So anybody that feels like they would like to leave the meeting, please do so, except of course for the board members and Ms. Noel. And so thank you again, and everyone have a good evening. For the board members, I would like to, I think our board meeting is oh, are we, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So before we resume our business meeting, shall we take a personal needs break?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Tell you what, is 5 minutes sufficient, or do you want to take 10 minutes? I would look to some advice from.
Shoot for 5. We'll do the best we can.
All right. So what do we do? Do we just leave everything running here? Maybe turn off our cameras, and then as we get back, we'll just turn ourselves back on.
That sounds good. And just make sure you're muted.
Okay. So.
Thank you.
Great. Stop video and mute.
Sean, whenever we're ready, you can just mention it and Jane will switch the screen.
Sorry, I didn't have my headphones in.
Oh.
Did you say something, Jolene?
Yeah, I was just saying whenever we are ready, Jane's listening and she can switch the screen.
Okay. Have we got everyone back?
Can you guys hear me without my headphones?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, they're just
Yep.
driving my ears nuts. Too many
Okay.
hours in the Zoom room today.
Okay. Yeah, Jane, let's take down the break sign. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us plus Jolene. Excellent. All right, everyone. I'm now looking at the agenda for the business meeting on page 2. And so I call to order this business meeting of the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board for May 14th, 2020. The agenda has been circulated. Ms. Noel, has there been any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes.
So I will move adoption of the agenda as circulated. All those in favor by show of hands? Carried unanimously. We'll now move to the adoption of the minutes. Turning first to the minutes from January 9th, 2020. Appeal hearing meeting. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I move adoption of.
I actually, sorry,
Yes, yes.
I have one to my own minutes. I
Sure.
realized that the header in my minute template has the incorrect date on both, so I will amend.
Okay, great, thank you. And actually, there's just one on the first page of the agenda. It refers to the appellant introduction and opportunity for any objections. And it talks about Agent Sarah Jones of Eric Harvey Law. I believe Eric is with a C instead of a K.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other? Oh, actually, there was another thing here is on these minutes, it's already notes the members present at the start before the first appeal. We don't need to list it again before the second appeal. The members present and members absent in administration.
Yeah, and I was just trying it with the new format. That was how some other municipalities did it.
Okay. Well, if so, then I would put it underneath the appeal because it looks like it just blends it, so one appeal and who's present, and then the next appeal, who's present. Okay. So with those changes, then I'll make a motion that to accept the January 9th, 2020 appeal hearing meeting for DP 2019-131 and BE 2019-34 be accepted as amended. All those in favor by raising your hand. Adam, are you in favor? Or?
Well, should I abstain by virtue of having
No.
been absent from?
No, I wasn't there either, but if you're here, you have to vote.
Okay.
Just to add clarity, so you can vote on an item if you weren't in attendance, but you cannot ask for changes or amendments.
To substantive.
Exactly.
For non-substantive things like I did. Okay.
Yeah, yes, sorry.
Okay, so carried unanimously. Now turning to the January 9th, 2020 business meeting minutes. Any errors or omissions? Okay, seeing none, I will then move acceptance of or approval of the January 9th, 2020 business meeting minutes as circulated. All those in favor by show of hands. Carried unanimously. Moving to item. Yes, Greg.
Not sure, but Jolene, your header date might be wrong there again. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yes.
you can check that, Jolene, and before they're signed off, make that correction.
Absolutely. I already circled it with my
Yeah,
red
great.
pen.
Okay, great. Moving to item 4, there is no next scheduled business meeting. So we'll move on to item 5. Now, this is a discussion on the decision on the format of the minutes and what level of summary will be captured. And just to give a little bit of context here, it had been recommended to us, through, I think, the municipal clerk's office, but also then confirmed by our lawyer that the minutes really should be not trying to capture all of the content that's presented, but they should be very high level to show the movement of the meeting. And the type of minutes that we've just looked at represent that. However, in a discussion on some, just some procedural matters that Noelle was, or Jolene was getting some feedback from Greg and I on, we had a discussion, and Greg expressed a concern, which I'll let him speak to, but maybe it needs a little bit more. And that's why we received a circulation of some clarification from our lawyer as to, and that hopefully everybody saw the email that, says, okay, well, this is what I was suggesting is the way it's done, but maybe if you want, you could say like a question, put the topic in, ask questions about parking and height or something like that, rather than trying to capture everything was said, but just put topics in. So with that context, I would like to ask Greg to introduce what he would like us to consider, and then let's have a discussion about it.
So in short, during my career, which was mostly in municipal governance, there was always this dichotomy. How big should the minutes be? And the dichotomy was make them just bang, bang, bang as the ones we just approved, or make them long. They have to have meaning. And there's pros and cons of each side. And I guess I fall in the middle, which actually happens to be where Kelsey Becker Brooks's recommendation is. You don't want verbatim minutes or any attempt at that, unless they really are verbatim. But if they're just say this happened, like the minutes were approved, there was a discussion, the appellant made his case, and that essentially what the minutes say. In my mind, they're not worth reading. Like, what are they for? You might as well just say the meeting took place, right? Like, in accordance with the agenda, you're done, right? So my attempt in life has always been to come down this middle, and Kelsey, the lawyer, sums it up here with her last paragraph, which is so maybe an acceptable middle ground is including detail in the summary in the form of topics as opposed to actual specifics of the submissions or questions. And she says, for example, the board asked questions about parking and food service, or the applicant responded to the concerns raised by the appellant concerning noise and privacy. I'm really happy with that. So my argument would be to have a little bit more input in the, or not input, but verbiage in the minutes, just to say what came up in the discussion. It doesn't have to be detail and he said, she said, or anything like that, but just that there was a discussion about parking, or there was a discussion about whatever, the effect of the building shadow or views. So for instance, the hearing we just went through, things that came up with parking, the gauntlet example, but you could put those out and just say, these were the issues raised, bang, 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 bang. There's 4 points. And you're not saying anything about long discussion, but you at least know what the person said rather than they just made a presentation.
Okay.
But
Thanks, Greg.
I agree with that, Greg. And also there's no interpretation, right? It's not Jolene interpreting what she thinks she heard. It was just, this was the topic. We talked about this without any personality or interpretation in it.
I like Greg's point of plainly put, it does give context. So when you reflect on it, it's like, oh yeah, that's what we did. That was the meat of the situation. So I like putting a bit of meat on the bones of the minutes.
Okay. Adam, Harry, Vi, any thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm like Jill with, when you look back at it, at least it gives you that there was, you know, you can reflect what was actually done, versus if you don't put anything in there, then it's pretty hard to remember what actually happened.
Okay. Vi, Adam, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with what Kelsey Becker said. Just the thought that there should be a little bit more detail so that you have an idea of what was being discussed, what issues were brought up. So a summary would be a good way to do that, rather than the board said this and the appellant said that. So if it was summarized, I think that would be suitable. It might be hard for Jolene to summarize the amount of information that was presented though, but there are a few themes that emerged, right? So you might be able to just use the themes.
Yeah, I don't think the idea is to summarize like a presentation, but to say this person made points with regards to, and name the topics.
Right. So summarize the topics and the themes that emerged, because some people brought up the same topic in different contexts, but we heard it 2 or 3 times, but that's the theme of that topic. So that was raised.
Great. Adam?
Very similar.
Okay.
What's been said already in terms of the middle.
Okay, well, I'd like to make a motion then, so that we have a record of a decision that's made here. And so, Jolene, I'm going to be quoting what Greg had quoted from Kelsey's email. My motion is that the minutes, the SDAB minutes, include detail in the summary in the form of topics, as opposed to the actual specifics of submissions or questions. Greg, does that sound like it's in line with what you were thinking?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I've put the motion on the table. Is there any discussion around the motion? Seeing none, I ask by a show of hands, all those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm just going to quickly get back to our agenda. And it looks like item 6 is adjournment. So I am going to move that we adjourn the meeting. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, this is the end of our meeting, and we will now close off of here and move to the discussion Zoom, where we can discuss the appeal that we have just heard earlier this evening. So I believe that Jolene has circulated